Hello and good afternoon to everybody joining us live and those who may be watching it after the fact. Welcome to this afternoon's masterclass on AI vendor selection, cutting through the noise. One of my favorite people, Danny Wareham, as he always says, as human beings can be attracted like magpies to nice shiny things. And AI seems to be the latest shiny thing that we're attracted to. But how do we set up that big investment for success? And today I am joined by Dave, Sandrea, and Zach to help us cut through the noise on that. So shall we go round and do some intros, guys? Sandrea, I think you're unmuted, so we'll start with you first.
Hi everyone, I'm Sandrea Morgan and I am a contact center obsessive. I think that's a good word to describe myself. Been in customer service for just over 20 years, worked in every role except forecasting and planning, which you don't want me anywhere near, but obsessed with the quality of the customer journey and my people journey. And as part of this conversation, I'm looking forward to sharing how AI has helped me improve service and make it a much better experience for the team as well. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Sandra. Hi, everybody. My name's Dave Hodgson. I look after large-scale change projects, more favourably known as transformation projects nowadays. I work for a company called Liberty Bloom. Liberty Bloom is a business services provider. Effectively, we help businesses with their back and middle office, large-scale change projects and operational delivery projects in the kind of finance, HR, procurement, and financing space. When I talk about transformation, I'm talking about large-scale structural changes, so operating locations, helping companies move into new target markets, and almost every conversation that I'm engaged in today focuses on the integration of AI and advanced technologies into business process. Over to you, Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Hey, everyone. Zach Hamilton. If you look at kind of my span of career, I've been both a buyer and on the tech side as essentially a seller. Ultimately, I grew up in the retail industry. Retail is my absolute passion. I have been everything from a store manager to a vice president of operations to leading e-commerce to being rolling out a smartphone division and then entrusted to lead customer and employee experience at Aaron's. So I've been forward facing, really kind of in the trenches, on the front lines. And ultimately, I'm extremely passionate about, helping brands go from insights to action. Very, very, very few experienced practitioners really know how to influence and sell their organizations internally. And in the last 8 years, I've really been on the tech side with brands like Medallia and Forsta and Parcel Lab, really helping brands, consulting for some of the biggest, most iconic brands in customer experience. So really looking forward to this conversation on AI as it comes up almost on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And thank you, Dave, for repping brand colours today. I'm sure you painted that just for me. So, guys, I want to start from the starting point, actually. When considering AI technology, what's the best starting point? And we'll go round in the same order again. Sandrea, what's your approach when you're looking at AI technology, and where's the place where you first start?
So the place that I first start is understanding your needs first. I think if you go out to look at the market without understanding exactly what would benefit your team and your business most, you are just going to be looking at, dozens of different providers and just feeling like it's all too much, and it can feel overwhelming. So the first place to start is defining your user experiences. So define your use cases and get clear about what type of AI, because there's lots out there, will be most beneficial to your business. That's the point at which you can then go, right, will be the most beneficial to me. So these are the types of vendors that I'm going to look at rather than going out to the market. trying to look at everything, because it will get expensive and potentially confusing.
Absolutely. I see a lot of people ask the question, hey, we're using it for this. What cases are you using it for? And is it relevant to you? And Zach, where's the place where you what are the early questions that you're asking yourself when you're looking at a use case?
Yeah, I'm with Andrea on this. It's really understanding what's the business problem that I'm trying to solve. Ultimately, if we look at our own company, look at the businesses that we're in, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different use cases that we could leverage AI for. So I'm with Andrea on this one. Ultimately, it is what is the business problem that we're solving for? But what I would also say is also be thinking about starting that conversation cross-functionally. Because your department peers, your cross-functional department peers, they're having these same conversations. They're thinking about, what are those use cases that we could be solving internally as well. And so ultimately, if every department goes at solving their own kind of use cases individually, then ultimately what you're going to end up with inside your organization is very siloed AI technology that gets implemented. And again, when you work in silos, ultimately you're not really solving the most important problem within the business, because those most important problems within your business don't get solved in one department. They get solved across all departments across the entire customer and employee journey. So that's where I would make my recommendation.
And from a transformation perspective, Dave, what are you thinking when you're starting on this journey?
Very interesting as always to hear from Andrea and Zach. And I have to say, I would build on what they say rather than offer a contrary opinion. Look, for me, I'm taking a bit of inspiration here from Ben Flimberg's book, How Big Things Get Done, and talks about kind of large scale transformation projects that succeed and that fail. What we all know, and the kind of the phrase that everybody's heard, the number of large scale change projects that fail is unreasonably high. And by failure, we're talking about they don't deliver on the results that were expected. They take much longer than they were anticipated to take, and they cost a lot more. Well, I say, and I just picked up on what Andrea said, plan slowly and execute quickly. And for me, there's a 3-step approach that works well. Take the time to understand the motivation from the business to instigate change. So what is it that you're looking to achieve? Often, not always, the common themes are cost reduction, their revenue growth. Sometimes it's establishing a new value proposition. Having that in mind really helps, because that kind of indicates the path to walk down. And then I like to encourage people to think about the future. And it's a painful exercise. But if you cast your mind forward 5 to 7 years and say, what is the world in which my business area, my company exists in? And what would I need to look like in order to thrive in this environment? And that often helps you kind of chart a course. And I think that the third and final thing I'd say is, then work out where to start. Zach and Andrea said, make sure that you've considered the broadest possible lens when you're looking at your kind of large-scale change programs and the involvement of AI. I also think it's important to know where you're going to be able to make a material impact, because with any new innovation, with any new technology that you're deploying, rather than committing a huge amount of spend down a particular path, secure a successful outcome, because something small, something tangible, because it will prove the concept, real proof of value. It'll secure buy-in from a wider group of decision makers, and it will really help align people behind a particular agenda.
Definitely. And I suppose to build on that in terms of question wise, when you're forward thinking sort of 5 to 7 years and weighing up the amount of vendors in the market, your large scale, well-known vendors versus your agile newcomers, what are the key considerations to take when considering, hey, should we look at one of the bigger players, the more established players, or a new technology coming along?
Let me have a quick
I'll start.
Oh, go on, Sandra, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, so I take the same approach that I do to other, procurement decisions, is to really just I make sure I've tested the product, because with the size differences in the organizations, yes, you can get places that have a great experience, they've been around for 20 years, and then you've got the super agile startups that you can ask them something and they'll build it for you in a month's time. So it really does vary. That the size of the organization makes a difference to the experience that you'd have. And so what helps me to make the final decision is always how I've tested. So, how are you testing each use case? How are you making sure that you've tested every journey, and that you're using that same assessment process for everyone? So I'd say fundamentally it comes down to the product itself, and does it do what it says on the tin? Not what they can do for you, but is it doing what you need it to do now? Because in the end, what matters is the outcome that you deliver.
Yeah.
So I say I'm going to do this and the AI is going to do that. It needs to be able to do it now. And that's, what allows me to make that final decision. I try not to get too obsessed about the size of the organization, but I do feel in the end you get more agility with smaller businesses, but there's higher risk because they have complexity themselves.
Absolutely. And it's weighing up that risk of a larger versus smaller. What extra considerations do you think you have to make, Zach, depending on size of the organization that you choose to partner?
Yeah, look, I'm kind of with Andrea on this. One of the decisions that we would make or are making is we're not just going to put all of our AI challenges or business problems to be solved in one basket. Ultimately, like there are some leading companies out there, some of the bigger companies out there who have access to more resources and capital. But like Sandrea mentioned, they're often very slow to move. And so when I'm thinking about how do I leverage these larger companies, it's what's the biggest problem I need to solve, but at the lowest risk. And then ultimately, I'm going to team up with some of these smaller, more agile AI companies where it's probably lower risk to the business. But in terms of reward, it might be a little bit higher. And we can actually leverage them to even push on a larger partner to go innovate. And so ultimately, what I'm thinking about is actually less about the tech and more about the partnership. So how do these companies show up from a partnership perspective? How are they working side by side? How are they bringing a new kind of perspective to the market on how to solve specific challenges? I think so. For too long, especially in the experience world and SaaS world, every company almost sounds the exact same when it comes to customer and employee experience. And so ultimately, I'm looking for those companies who are also challenging the market, who want to push the market forward, who don't want to stay where we are, but are looking at solving, these experience challenges in new ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. People say the same about recruiters. All sound the same. Everyone sounds the same. And Dave, do you approach it any differently given the fact that you are obviously serving customers, right, and partners across multiple different things, across different HR functions, shared service functions? So what's your approach?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Thanks, Kerry. I think what is different is that because we are instigating large-scale business change on behalf of a customer, a client, that client, you need to understand where you're meeting them. And so the chances are they have a lot of their infrastructure already in place. And so you're thinking about solutions that will complement kind of legacy architecture that they already have. It's highly unlikely that with an engagement you're going to be having a $15 million, $20 million change conversation about an enterprise system. It's much more likely that you're thinking about how you can bring in solutions to play nicely around the edges, to aggregate some of those kind of satellite solutions. I think what I would say is whether to use kind of large enterprise grade providers or the small nimble startups depends both on the size of the business that you're working with. So for some of the smaller startup scale-up businesses that we work alongside, enterprise grade infrastructure just isn't an option. Quite slow to move, very expensive to get started with. And so sometimes it's we'll start small and kind of grow into it as the business scales up. Whereas with some enterprise grade businesses, they just can't take the risk on security, on data privacy, and they want the control and even down to things like user and SIT testing that come with these very established enterprise grade platform providers, and almost they'd be prepared to be second, if you like, in the AI arms race, if I can call it that, for the benefit of a proven and trusted solution. So I really do think it comes down to who your customer group is, where you meet the customers, and how much influence you have over the customer's architecture, or whether you're integrating with something that's already there.
It's a really interesting point. I remember I met someone at a tech event and they were saying, hey, we're a customer of this big, well-known tech platform. And they said, but we don't use any of it. We use one small sector. We've got all of the gear, but we're so risk averse to using all of the fancy tag-ons as part of it. And I guess that's part of the danger, right, of having the big one. But as you said, the security, and we're sort of outweigh the costing of that side. Now, with so many suppliers out there, especially new ones coming in, and forgive my croaky voice again, where do you start with the tender process to make sure that you're including some of these newer to market tech companies? I'll start with you this time, Zach. I suppose you'll all have a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, ultimately where I'm going to start is I'm going to be working cross-functionally with my peers and understanding their use cases. And ultimately, they're going to have a list of potential tech companies and vendors that they're going to want to partner with, right? They've been out in the market. They've been, talking to their own kind of marketing peers or operation peers. So everyone's going to have a general idea of, hey, here's the problems we're trying to solve. Here's the tech companies we want to partner with. And so ultimately, I would provide that list to our procurement team, who would start to line everything up. I think the other piece is, I've also started to source just through the power of LinkedIn connections. So if I think about kind of my network of, over 15,000, mostly in retail or in the experience industry, there are times where I'll just make a post of, hey, look, I'm trying to solve this specific problem. Who are some of the more innovative tech companies out there? Now, I will say your inbox is going to probably get blown up with some pitch slapping. But what I will say is ultimately what you are going to get is you're going to get some solid recommendations that maybe you aren't thinking about. And so that's what I like to do, is just also see, hey, what's out there that maybe my inner circle's not looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. And is your approach similar, Sandra? Do you want to cast the net as wide as possible, or are you index searching certain things? What are you looking at when you're looking at this tech in the tender process?
Yeah, I tend to look at organizations that are connected with best practice and the associations that I'm in. So be it the CCMA or the Contact Center Forum. So really established customer service associations. What are the vendors that are working with them, have won awards that my peers in my network are using? That's where I tend to end up, because you can actually have a real conversation rather than the sales pitch. You talk to people who have actually used it, lived it, and you get a more honest conversation, because you very rarely get a completely smooth transition. No matter how good your transformation project is, it's never really perfect. So the other thing you really want to be talking about is how they deal with it when things go wrong, and how they handle issues, how quickly they resolve things. So you get to have those conversations if you connect with your peers and you're dealing with organizations that are connected with places like the CCMA.
You tend to get the reality. You tend to get the reality version, not just the, hey, this is the great story, but these were all of the teething issues in the months before. What about you, Dave? Because obviously you've got, again, you're doing it through partnership, and you must have a massive network being in the sector that you're in. So what's your approach, or how does it differ from Sandra and Zach?
The approach has definitely changed over the last 5 years. It used to be the case that we would look where everyone else was looking, right? You'd look to Gartner, you'd look to Everest, and you'd say, who are those kind of quadrant players that I should know about. I think the market is evolving at a rapid pace, and so I always recommend that people stay close to sites like TechCrunch, TechRadar, so that you can, ultimately this is about access to knowledge. And if you don't know about these new vendors coming into the market, as Zach was saying, then how could you possibly include them in a process? There is an emerging trend of AI advisory services now. People who are just plugged into the communities, the startup communities, that can help with this. But it's up to you, depending on your business needs, whether that is a useful service or not. Generally, when you engage with transformation teams, transformation professionals, they should be able to bring you that kind of market knowledge themselves. And as Andrea says, a lot of this comes from the communities that they're just connected to. So I think when we think about kind of good startup communities, there's a few. Y Combinator, This Week in Startups, that they've got a really good kind of incubation suite, and they're plugged into companies that will go on to do good things. We're very fortunate at Liberty Bloom. We're still wholly owned by our parent, Liberty Global, who has a ventures investment arm. And so, we get, very close to companies who are going through the kind of, early series funding rounds. And you really get to not only understand companies that you might want to watch, but also you're learning about changing early market trends. You're starting to see what people are prepared to invest in and the returns that they're making on early stage capital investments. So I think, access to information is the short answer to the question.
Absolutely. And I've heard of scenarios, depending on the size of the organization, for some of the smaller challenger brands. If you join up with an early challenger brand in tech, then you get a good deal, and you get to build the use cases that then they would go to pitch to Sandrea, to Zach, to Dave. So have you got any experience any of you working in early startup challengers, working with an early startup tech vendor, and sort of the value that brings?
Yeah, so I'd say I have. So I've here recently. I think you're spot on there. One of the great opportunities, if you partner with a early kind of challenger, is that partnership, and you also get to influence the product roadmap, and ultimately, you have more flexibility in the way the solution gets built. I think the one thing that I'm cautious of is like this pay to play, right? So if you think of a lot about the analysts, or even like the CXPA community, a lot of the sponsorships are paid for when they think about the tech that they're really going to sponsor and put their weight behind. And so ultimately, when you think about some of these smaller vendors, some of the startups, even the scale ups, they may not have that sponsorship in their budget to go pay to play, but that doesn't mean that their tech or their advisory is any less. I mean, it's actually on the contrary. I've actually seen it be far more superior, where they really focus on, instead of those sponsorship dollars going into the different kind of professional organizations, they're going into their own R&D and advisory services. So I think a lot of it, Carrie, we're talking about taking risk. I love taking risk. I will partner with, a lesser known tech company in order to have some of those first to market advantages, than try to be, on the back end of it and basically get locked into a box.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did exactly the same, but I was referred by a customer and became one of the first 10. I think I was top 3 to join a new tech platform. And it's been great because they come to me and they've built all of the things that I want. So from a selfish perspective, it's great. Dave, do you have much experience working with some of the really small early doors players on your side, and what
Yes,
some of the advantages?
yes. In fact, yes. So some of our deepest relationships now are with businesses that when these relationships started 2 and 3 years ago were very, very early stage. We've been top 3 and sometimes top customers for very early stage businesses. Look, our experience is, to Zach's point as well, you are very much along for the ride. You shouldn't go into these relationships expecting things to be fully formed, whether that be initial engagement sales materials. Sometimes you literally have to go and poke around yourself to understand the product offering. But equally, you get phenomenal engagement from the people who have incubated an idea into a solution, and the level of influence, the level of control you have over the kind of future direction of travel, the product iteration is really fantastic. And I think the other thing I'd say is, done well, there is a mutually beneficial relationship where the intellectual property that one can invest in an early stage business by way of being the test case, if you like, can often be paid back in future relationships. So we've had relationships with virtual agent partners, now agentic AI solutions providers, as their businesses have grown up, who we co-own intellectual property with. And that's fantastic, because the investments that you're making in the early stage and all of that kind of time invested in learning builds a product which you can then both grow to benefit from. So I probably encourage businesses to think about your genuine partnerships. These aren't necessarily equity partnerships; they're just time investment partnerships that can yield returns beyond just the initial instruction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, have you found working with some of the bigger partners, because we've talked about enterprise grade and utilizing that alongside some of the smaller partners as well, do you find typically, because you've all worked for big brands as well as smaller operations, do you find the big brands are more resistant to early stages than some of the challenger brands? I'll go to you first, Andrea.
Yes, is the straightforward answer to that question. But I understand the reasoning. The risk to the organisation, depending on the size of the business, potentially fines, etc., if we get it wrong, is significant. So when I face that, I understand it.
Yeah.
And I guess, learn the processes around it. So, if it's legal and compliance that I need to go through, I think in different organizations you have AI strategic bodies that are being set up within the organization, and AI boards to make sure that we're doing what we're doing correctly. And so, although it's frustrating and it takes more time, what it means is that we do it correctly. The customer's data is safe, our data is safe, and so the product that we end up with is a good one. So the outcome is better because of it, is the simplest way to put that. And so, get your legal teams, your compliance teams involved as early as possible to make sure that that vendor is where they need to be in terms of their security.
Yeah. You just find that they probably, as a smaller provider in the space myself, I find coming from big corporate, I probably have to prove that in a lot more detail than I did coming from big corporate. And is that
a lot more detail, a lot more, I think, paperwork that you need to complete, tests that you need to get done, information that they need to provide to prove that they are secure as they say they are. And you do need to work really closely with your IT colleagues as well to assess that process, depending on your level of knowledge, to make sure that that has been done correctly.
Absolutely. And I see you nodding along a lot with that, Zach. Is there anything that you'd add on that front in terms of the big businesses with the smaller suppliers?
No, I think Andrea's bang on there, right? I mean, ultimately, when I've worked with compliance and legal and IT to push through vendors, what I have found is the larger vendors, that have the names, that have been around, that are well funded or financed, they're not as scrutinized as hard, right? Because ultimately the business is going to be looking at if there was a breach or if there was some type of damage, can we hold them responsible? Can we recover specific damages? And so when you have a lesser known tech company who no one really knows or haven't even heard about, they're smaller, right? The risk that the organization is going to take on is greater. And so they're going to run, like Sandrea mentioned, they're going to run them through a more rigorous process just so that they can minimize the risk for the business.
Absolutely. And if you found, Dave, because you work with multiple customers, once you've pushed, if you've had a tech that's worked really well for one customer, it's easier to sell it on to some of the larger ones. Not sell it on, but you know what I mean? Influence.
No, I know what you mean. And absolutely agree with everything that's said. I think the only observation that I would add in addition is, don't underestimate the personal risk from the sponsor of a project who makes the decision to use a startup, scale up, smaller business rather than an enterprise grade alternative. Because if a project fails for whatever reason, and you used the industry, leading provider, people will say, "Oh dear, the project failed," and we'll move on. If you use a startup business, people will point the finger and say, "Well, I knew that was going to fail because you worked with a startup." And so the degree of personal risk behind that decision maker is real.
Yeah. And I've found, coming at it from the other side of the fence, like from a stakeholder, being a smaller provider leading in, you need everybody who's part of the project to be brought in and engaged. Because if one person isn't, they can derail it right from that mentality. I knew it wasn't going to work, so they almost make it not work from that perspective. And so weighing up costs versus return on investment, because obviously it can be expensive to buy this technology. What are the key things to keep in mind when weighing up the costs versus return on investment? And I'll start with you this time, Dave.
All right. No, it was my favorite topic. So thanks for bringing me in. This is super important. Really, all of the decisions we're making, capital allocation decisions. If I give you some money, what will the return on that money be over a period of time? And will it be greater than I could have achieved if I had given somebody else some money to do something else? There is a huge amount of hype about the future of technology, the AI explosion, and there is a lot of money that has been lost as a result. Now, some would say that's kind of table stakes whenever you're birthing a new concept, but I work with companies for whom your capital allocation is a serious event, and many companies, when they're engaged, as I said, as an answer to the earlier question, are either looking for cost reduction or they're looking for revenue generation from the investments that they make. So I think understanding from the outset a sensible idea of budgets, and then being very open and realistic about those budgets, because we see time and time again, in order to get an investment over the line, people will downplay the cost and the time that it will take to execute. And then when things go over budget and when things are delayed, you're in that situation where you're throwing good money after bad. And so I think time spent properly, valuing, assessing the cost of an engagement before you do it and being very realistic about that cost, I think is super important. And then, you asked about, the measurements in terms of success. Well, I think it tends to be, and certainly with kind of cost reduction initiatives, like a lot of the agentic technology that we've already mentioned, is focused towards. The most obvious calculation is, human efficiency.
Yeah.
So there is a process. The process is undertaken by a number of people. By deploying this piece of technology, I will either need fewer people to perform that process, or those people will be more productive and will be able to perform more tasks in a defined period of time. Now, that is linear. There is nothing wrong with that as a measure of success. It is important that we measure these things. But I think, of growing value is measuring output. And if you think about, to kind of make this real for a second, I'll very quickly touch on finance and HR use cases to give context to the audience. If you're looking at a finance use case, what is your cost of processing a transaction? What is your cost of processing a journal? What is your cost of processing an invoice? What is the cost of reconciling a bank account? And and being able to measure the delta of, well, if I make an investment of 100K, 500K, 5 million in a particular piece of technology, what ought that cost to be? And that's a really nice, really definable measurable, which then removes as well that direct correlation between new technology coming in and human capital going out. I think that's a very linear comparison. So I think a bit more sophisticated is that kind of cost per transaction. And I think very quickly in the HR space, I think we're thinking about agentic AI as being that kind of employee engagement tool and that kind of employee lifecycle management tool, and more sophisticated than are there fewer HR advisors needed in my HR support team is what is the ability to be able to connect with the right answer whenever I need it, day or night. What does that do in terms of my level of engagement in a business? What does that do to my sense of connection and purpose in a business? And we all know that motivated employees are more productive employees, and that number should be measurable, as a kind of 10, 20% output in terms of the whole entity that you're providing services to. So hopefully that's okay.
I guess it really key for you in terms of all of the businesses that you look after as well, because I'm guessing they come for you on that one if it's
it's very important that we measure it well.
And you, Zach, you've worked for a few of the disruptor brands in this phase as well, and you as well, Sandra, some of the challenger brands, which now anybody seeking investment in anything is thinking ROI much quicker than sort of cash in the bank wise. So how do you weigh up the cost versus ROI? What are the key things that you're keeping in mind, Zach, depending on size of organization and that sort of thing?
So Sandra, why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
I think what I was going to do is just add to Dave's point. I think I go back to my use cases, and because I'm looking at cost there as well. And what you can think about is look at it in different ways. So there are some places where the complexity is the thing that you're trying to solve and will have the biggest bang for your buck. And so you choose the approach of, this is the process that's most complex and most painful for my customer and most painful for my team. So if I can fix this process, I don't just get the saving in terms of the cost, but the people pain, my team is going to have a better experience of their role. And the customer is going to have a better experience of the organization. Or you can choose something that's high volume and easy-ish in terms of complexity, but taking out that high volume concept and giving it to an AI bot to do will mean that you free up time for your people to do other things. So as you're making that decision about which use case you're going to focus on, this is one of those places where you can go, the return on the investment can look different depending on what would really add value to your organization. And so in the past, for me, I've chosen a process that was highly complex and painful for the customer and painful for the team. And the result was I took a process that, used to take us 2 weeks to do and took it down to 5 days through the use of AI. And so I saw improvements in my Trustpilot. I saw less absence around a pain point in the year, because it was an issue that happened at key periods around Black Friday, around Christmas, that really kind of like annoying period when you're running a contact center and then 25% of your team is sick, right? Because it's just a high pressure task, and I took it out and it made a huge difference. So I saw, yes, I saved money, but actually people time and the pain for the team was removed as well. So you can get a return on investment in very different ways depending on what the priority for your organization is.
Exactly, because if you're not losing people and having to invest in hiring more people or expensive holiday cover or absence cover in peak periods, which I know is very pricey. But Sandra, you touched there on processes that are painful for your employees. How quickly do you get them involved in building up, or how do you involve your team in building these use cases in the first place when you're using AI for people on the front lines?
Yeah, I think it's important to help get them involved in that assessment of which processes are most painful. But they also will show you steps that you didn't know existed. The amount of times you think this is the journey, but then they go, oh, but then I go into here and I do this, and you're like, but that's not in the process document. The amount of times that happens is insane. So, as early as possible in that definition of the use cases, we've got exceptional agents, and a lot of the time when you're looking at AI, you're actually trying to find a tool or an AI platform that gives you what that experienced agent is doing. So that's where you can use agent assists and really help the agent be better. But yeah, I think it's pivotal to get them involved as early as possible in the process.
Absolutely. And have you got anything to add on that side, Zach?
Yeah, I think from an ROI perspective, I think I'll offer a contrarian view here. So I've been on both. It's just my nature. So I've been on both the buyer side and even kind of on that sales side, right? And ultimately, whenever you take the SaaS company who's trying to sell into, they're going to build this ROI model. They're going to even be very, very conservative on what their technology can do and hope to just pass the sniff test with the CFO. And I can tell you, every time I've taken an ROI model in, the CFO has crapped all over it. Where they're here, she's just like, this is great, but ultimately, this is if all things remain true. And all things are not going to remain true in any business. And so ultimately, what CFOs are really thinking about is how do we protect shareholder value? Ultimately, they're thinking about what's the strategic initiatives, those levers that we have sold our investors and shareholders on, that we're going to achieve whatever that revenue number is, whatever that profitability number is. And so ultimately, CFOs aren't looking for an ROI calculation. They're looking for, can you embed this technology and help us accelerate these specific initiatives if we invest in it? Just like Dave mentioned, if it's not already in the budget, then we're probably going to have to reprioritize something. So what's the cost? I'd also say, what's the cost of inaction? Yeah. If we don't get focused on these use cases that Sandra mentioned. So ultimately, I'm not thinking about it from an ROI perspective. I'm thinking about it as, will this technology help us? One, can we get it embedded in the system and the way in which we work as an organization? Will it help us become more productive? Does it help us deliver on these strategic initiatives and faster, right? More efficient. And so ultimately, those are the things that I'm thinking about. And then the cost of inaction versus struggling to put together an ROI case that the CFO is just going to, let's just be honest, they're going to ignore it.
I guess it depends sometimes in terms of parts of the world as well, and as well actually, because there's a couple of things that we talked about here in terms of we might as well start from here with the global organizations. So you have all worked in global organizations and currently do. So, and the compliance, etc., is different globally, right? So how do you approach implementing AI technology across each region? Do you silo? Do you start in one place and then build in another? What's been the most effective approach in your experience? And whoever unmutes first, go first. Oh, no one's unmuting. Everyone's polite. I was expecting you, Zach.
No, I think, in my experience working with global brands, ultimately, most of them have been extremely conservative, where we start with kind of the European markets, where GDPR is the most strict when you think about it from a global perspective. Of course, in the States where I'm based, we're not as strict when it comes to GDPR, but we do have some states that have regulations that almost match, GDPR, states like California, New York, and others. And so ultimately, I think it's about what's the risk that the company likes to take on. Most of the companies, especially now, we will build for GDPR and just apply it globally. And we understand that that's probably going to inhibit some things that we could do here in the States, and it will, take away a few of those use cases that we might want. But ultimately, the brands that I've worked for, we typically take a more conservative approach and build for GDPR.
What's been the approach that you have taken, Sandra? Because I know you were in a global organization in your last role.
Yeah, it was exactly that. So it was taking the European GDPR approach and applying it in most places. I think the only thing I would add is that there are some regions where you want to do something completely different, and the scale that you have in that region might allow you to go through a procurement process for a specific type of technology that would really add value there. Sometimes that's sales conversion, for example, and you can buy a tool that would really be a game changer that's simple to add, we'd still do it. Wow. So it really depends on the needs of that region. The majority of the time it would be the European GDPR approach, but sometimes depending on the size of the region, you can do something different.
Add on little tag-ons in certain regions where the compliance is different, for example, and it might be a more simplistic process.
And if your service includes sales as well, that's a completely different strand. And there is a lot more out there to help you with things like upselling and conversion that we couldn't use here.
Absolutely. And Dave, what's been your approach on that side when looking at global implementations?
I think to start with, everything Zach and Sandra say, look, so you start in the region where you've got the highest barrier to entry, and use that as your standard. We build better because we build more secure platforms. We build platforms that will then be able to scale quickly. So that is the intention. Ultimately, when we look at I guess product development, so technical product development, we approach our design in such a way that it meets the needs of a client group, but it is built in as an agnostic way as possible, so that it will fit in to changing client landscapes. It will play well with existing platforms and systems, and because of the nature of the engagements that we have, which are multi-territory engagements, it will comply with regulations in different territories. But designing kind of plug and play isn't easy. Look, as Zach and Sandra have highlighted, you may have a customer in a region that needs something that you either haven't built before or is going to be, a relatively bespoke engagement. And so, there are times where you'll need to kind of build back. So let's say you want to use that same design somewhere else. A good example for me, I think, in Europe is, Europe and then the kind of Schengen area. So it's kind of Switzerland is always a good one, because you kind of got different privacy restrictions, you've got different requirements and regulatory requirements. And so even in a region, you can have sub-pockets in the region where there are different standards, and sometimes you can have quite bespoke standards as well. So just again, using Switzerland as an example, the Swiss standard is more or less unique to a small cluster of territories. And so you may end up, if you just adopted the approach of build for the highest barrier to entry, you would build something that just isn't needed or useful to other regions. And so I think have a principle, but then be prepared to be adaptable.
Absolutely. And by the way, for anybody who is watching live, please feel free to fire in any questions. We can see comments coming through. But just one thing that we touched on that I think is probably important that I haven't covered, sorry, I probably should have covered this a little bit earlier, is business readiness, actually, for the technology that you choose to implement. I think we all talked about this, where companies have implemented things that they're maybe not ready for, or they have thought that the impact might be different. Klarna, for example, who thought that, they might not need any agents at all in the human form. So how do you know that your business is ready, or prepare your business for when you're implementing AI technology? And I'm going to go ladies first on this one.
So the way I've approached preparation is to test and have a period of trial where you see the actual outcomes of the AI before you go into the next phase of your project, because all of these are projects that you are running. So the first phase is to obviously go for your process, pick your vendor, but I would run it for a minimum of a month, really, to get a decent amount of data in terms of the impact of the AI, and see the things that you didn't expect. So sometimes you can introduce something, and I've introduced something recently where we did it, and then we had outcomes that we didn't expect, really positive outcomes for the advisors and positive out from the customers, that allowed us to make that second phase even stronger. Yeah. So I would say give yourself time, trial it, see the outcomes before you do something like, get rid of half of your team and then realize that you still need them. So trial, see the outcomes, see if it will really deliver what you expect, and then go into the next phase of your project.
And I guess that's considering back almost a circle to the cost versus ROI. Someone went, hey, we can get rid of our whole team. Look at how the wages we're saving through this technology, and then go, maybe that wasn't quite right. What were some of the unforeseen benefits that you saw in the trial phase?
So as an example, using a call summarization AI bot, and what we saw was that it helped advisors to stop that need for thinking and improve that engagement with the customer. So we were operating in multiple languages, so they no longer had to be thinking about translating into English to write down whatever the note was, because actually it was all already there in the correct language. So it took out a step for them in terms of complexity, which just allowed them to just have more thinking time and more the ability to really engage with the customer in a very different way. So that was the biggest thing. It was, one, I don't need to translate, and two, I can just copy into this document without thinking about the language, which really helped them feel better about the interaction. And we saw improvements in CSAT off the back of it.
I think those auto transcriptions from using them are so useful to keep you in the conversation, because I used to find I'd be writing things down and I'd almost be listening to write, and I'd have to read what I'd written to know what they'd said.
Yeah. So the benefit we thought we were going to get was that time saving, but we also got the time saving plus improved interactions, because you could be more present with the customer in the conversation.
Absolutely. And Zach, same thing to you in terms of the business readiness.
Yeah, I think the Klarna, I'll go to that real quick. I think Klarna is a really good example of, it was a predefined scope of tasks that we want the agent to take care of. It was looked at very much in a silo. And of course, it wasn't looked at on general reasoning of, the human being in the loop. And so ultimately, when I think about kind of company readiness, I think of AI as really just agility on steroids. And most companies want to say that they're very agile and they can work very agile and they make decisions very, very quickly. But ultimately, those are some of the probably like two competencies and skill sets that I'll look at first. One, how well do we leverage data to make business decisions, and how quick do we make them? So how many meetings do we have based on this one decision in order for us to say, let's go? I can tell you if it's more than one, you're not ready for Agile or ready for AI. Then I also look at the way in which your organization works. So if you are still working very siloed, and yes, you may have Agile principles running through just your specific department, but you're not working cross-functionally, problems are not siloed problems. They're cross-functional problems. And so ultimately, like in the case of Klarna as well, or customer service, yes, you might be reducing time to resolve tickets, and containment might be a number, but if you're never fixing the root cause of what's driving calls into your customer service center, then you're always just going to be looking at containment and not true building better customer experiences. And so I look at those things: decision making. Are you truly an agile organization? And ultimately, how well do you work cross-functionally, especially under pressure? Because those are the three kind of core competencies that you're going to need when you add in AI and an agent.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I find really interesting is CX directors and contact center directors were being put under pressure by some of the CEOs over the years because of the Klarna case. Hey, Klarna have got no agents, and
yeah,
I guess that kind of aged like milk. And Dave, from your side, what are your questions that you're asking to your partners and internally to ask that are you ready? Have you got business readiness? And I suppose you've got a few points of reference working with multi customers at the same time.
Yes, yeah, it's let's learn from those that have gone before us. I'm a big fan of kind of applying theory or a theoretical framework to understand kind of what is still a very human process. We're still talking about a change process ultimately. And so I like Amara's law or Gates's law that we tend to overestimate how much change we can instigate in a short space of time, and then underestimate the impact that we could have in a longer period of time. And I think nowhere is that clearer than when people are budgeting for investments in AI. And, oh yeah, great. The Klarna example is a good one, but we're going to bring in these solutions, and they're going to change the way we work, and we're going to have no people anymore, or we're going to have those problems will just go away. Great, good. But actually, and then you execute, and people get disillusioned by the impact that the technology has had because you overstated what was achievable in a short space of time. And it takes a long time, once that kind of loss and doubt has set in, to recover those losses, if you can at all. Many projects have then just been shut down at that point. And I think, when you think about that kind of change process and the kind of change curve that we're all familiar with, you kind of, people need time to process. Professionals like, the four of us and many people who are listening, no doubt, have been on this AI track for a while now. A couple of years, you've read every paper, you wake up in the morning over your cornflakes and you're listening to podcasts, you're reading articles. But many of the people who change is happening to in the businesses that we work with, they're going through that change cycle for the first time. And so they're getting this, it's either all doom and gloom, it's, the doubt they'll never be able to replace the work that we do. So it's the why we're trying. You don't get the commitment that you need. And then it takes a long time to get through that, out to the other side, where you've got this acceptance and confidence and hopefully advocacy in the thing that you're trying to promote. So I think, to answer your question simply, let's remember that for the most part, we're still dealing with human-centric businesses, and humans process change information, in a cyclical way. Let's remember that because we are likely to be the change agents entering businesses in the roles that we have and with the AI advocacy that we have, others are going to need to be brought on a journey, that kind of awareness and education journey. We need to give them time to go through the process. So that, right back to where I started, that kind of plan slowly and execute quickly becomes incredibly important. Doesn't need to delay the length of time the projects are taking. It's just about the allocation of time in a project to making sure everybody's lined up, bringing people on that journey, and being ready to effect the change.
Yeah, and using it to, I guess, you understanding the root cause of the problems that you're using technology for and stuff as well, and across all of the Klarna stuff. Now, probably got time for a very quick 10-20 second top tip or top thing to avoid when looking at vendor selection in AI. We'll go alphabetical. Dave first.
Use the resources that you all have access to. Everybody on this call, have been talking about community, have been talking about networks. Like any industry, if you're thinking about it and you're not quite sure what to do, ask the community, reach out to one of us, professionals who can help to guide you on the journey, because doing it well is important. Achieving the results that you want in a short space of time, so that you'll get future investment in these sorts of solutions is important, and the price of getting it wrong is significant.
Absolutely. Sandrea?
I'd say it's about that use case process. So get the right people involved in defining your use cases, because the quality of those use cases will define the quality of the outcome at the end.
Yep. And
good quality use cases.
And builds the trust, I guess, to expand it further when all things go well in the little cases. Zach, what about yours?
I would say make it meaningful. In order to drive momentum with AI within your organization, you have to start small and build momentum. So not just the use case selection, which I'm there with Sandrea, but it's what's the most meaningful. So what are those strategic initiatives that you can start to build momentum with, which drives trust and credibility?
Thank you. So thank you to everyone who has signed on today. I have never managed to make one of these inside an hour, but we are only 1 minute over today, so it's great. First of all, thank you so much, Dave, Zach, Andrea, for lending us your time today. It has been so useful. And I always love doing these because obviously I'm not in the industry, I'm on the fringes. So I always love to learn something new to help out the industry and that sort of thing. So if people are open to sharing inboxes and stuff, as Dave said, he's open to you reaching out. Sandrea and Zach, if you are too, let us know. And I will comment below to say, hey, reach out to them. All right.
Absolutely. Happy to chat and share anytime.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. Speak to you later.
Have a great rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
That was
Thank
great.
you, Zach.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks.